Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining A&M's national webinar this afternoon entitled Controlling Costs and Maximizing Value for Your VMware Spend. My name is Colleen Causey. I'm a national account manager with A&M. I have an 11-year-long relationship with the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association and also 25 plus years of experience in both the IT and network industries. All of those years have had a strong focus on the enterprise or Fortune 500 space. So I have the knowledge to manage large, complex scale accounts such as Blue Cross. I'd like to have my colleague today and your primary presenter introduce himself as well. David?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm David Abbott. I'm the Director of Data Center and Cloud here at A&M and also one of our principal consulting architects. I've been in IT for about 25 years now and really focusing these days heavily on just kind of that data center and cloud architecture, how we drive efficiencies, how we build cyber resilience, and kind of some of those emerging technologies in this space. So very excited to talk to you today about VMware. It's been definitely a hot topic for a lot of people here. As a reminder today, we do have a Q&A button at the top of the screen that you can use for asking any questions you want. And I've got one of my colleagues, Matt Good, here on the line, who's one of our principal data center architects. They'll be able to answer some of those Q&A questions as we go, and I'll grab any that I see as I go through here as well and try to answer them live. So, all right, take it away, Colleen.
Great. So just from a high level overview, I wanted to review the agenda on what we'll be covering today. So first we'll cover who is A&M. Next, David's going to jump into what has changed with Broadcom VMware. He'll next take you on the VMware renewal journey that many of you may have already faced or will face in the near future. And then finally, he'll cover, does it make sense to change? And as David mentioned, we will have a Q&A. So for those who have just joined, your Q&A button is at the top of the screen. So just click on the Q&A. Everyone is muted right now. If you'd like to speak during the Q&A, you just press Q&A and what your name is, and then we'll unmute you. But feel free to ask questions as we go along, and we will try and answer them. So I'm going to cover who is A&M. Many of you may not be aware that A&M has a national contract in place with the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. So how did we gain that national agreement? Well, the Blue Cross and Blue Shield has a group purchasing organization whose job it is to determine what national agreements should be in place to service the needs of the different Blue Cross plans across the nation. So they go and interview with those Blue Cross plans to find out what those needs are and to also find out how you feel about your current vendors. Over the past year, some of the feedback that's come back on those interviews has been, well, we feel that our current vendors are complacent, or they take our business for granted, or they're no longer strategic. Well, that offered a great opportunity for A&M to build a relationship with Blue Cross on a national scale. As you can see by this slide here, we have a net promoter score of 97. We offer speed, flexibility, and support, and it's evidenced in that net promoter score, which is a world-class score, and it means our customers really like doing business with us. But we like to call ourselves the soul of a startup and the experience of an enterprise. So what does that mean to your Blue Cross plan? Well, it means we're flexible and fast enough to have the soul of a startup, but we have a vast engineering bench, which gives us the experience of an enterprise. We're very, very proud to say that we have a 6 engineer to 1 sales rep ratio. What that means for you is that we do have the engineers to come in and deep dive with your organization to find the right solutions for you. So looking at A&M's broad portfolio, we're divided into 3 major segments within our company. The first is risk mitigation. Then we have enterprise infrastructure, and finally innovation. And within each of those segments, we have different practices. Today's practice is focused on data center and cloud, which David is a director over. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague right now, where we can dive right into our Broadcom discussion. David?
Perfect. Thank you. Let me grab this. All right. So Broadcom, it's been a little bit of time now since Broadcom went and kind of grabbed VMware up and kind of disrupted the lives of a lot of IT shops. And this continues to evolve and change as we've been going forward here over the last really year and a half now. And if you haven't really dug into it before, you haven't looked at this as to what's actually changed or how it's going to impact you, there's just a real couple pretty big bullet points that have come out of this. And that's mostly that all the perpetual licenses are end of sale. That means that, well, those products, they're ending support on them. You can no longer get support for the perpetuals going forward. And instead, you now need to repurchase new subscriptions at your renewal time. There's also a lot less options. It used to be several thousand SKUs you had to choose from, and you could a la carte put together your bundles to use just the products you wanted. Broadcom kind of realized that's not entirely efficient, and they really wanted to just focus in on a few things. So they kind of narrowed down those bundles to just a few options that we'll go over with this a little bit as well. And then also Broadcom has really been shifting their focus to the largest customers. That means that their products are kind of aligned towards those largest customers. They don't want to deal with those smallest little customers that take as much effort as a large customer and generate a lot less revenue. So they've been really pushing hard to shift their focus, and they've been demonstrating to the industry, unfortunately, that they have that focus with a lot of pain sometimes to smaller customers. So what does this mean for you? It really means that absolutely, if you go through a renewal and you have not done one yet, that your costs will increase over what you paid previously. Effectively, they're saying that, hey, previously you bought this perpetual license with some maintenance, and then you can keep buying maintenance. Well, we're ending that, and now you're going to buy a subscription that includes that license as well as maintenance bundled in, and you're going to purchase that over some term, and you're going to keep having to renew that term. So costs definitely rose up there. We see people anywhere from, 200% increase to far higher as far as costs go. Again, it's subscriptions only going forward. But with that said, your perpetual licenses are not going to go away. They're not disappearing on you if you can't get stuff in place quick enough for, getting to the subscription model. But you can't renew support. You'll still get critical security patches on products, even though they're out of support. But know that there may be a 20% cost uplift if you drop out of support and try to get back in with a new subscription renewal. That's a recent change from VMware as well. You're also going to see that VMware initially started out offering a lot of one-year subscriptions, like, hey, here's a 1 year you can do, a 3 year or 5 year. A lot of organizations took that 1 year, and VMware lately has been shifting back into saying, hey, we're just going to do 3 and 5 year subscriptions. I'll kind of dive a little bit more into those and kind of some of the pieces that may help you deal with a longer subscription timeline. Sometimes we still get exclusions for 1 year, but for the most part, expect a 3 to 5 year subscription renewal. And also know that it seems like every month Broadcom is coming out with something new. Usually we start to hear it in the field where sales reps are saying one thing about, you need this number of products, or we're not going to sell this, or this has been discontinued. And eventually it trickles back into the partners. Eventually it trickles out of the VMware organization to everybody else. So just know that it can change quickly. This presentation today is as up to date as I could make it based off the information we have. So looking at the products, I mentioned that we've limited the number of SKUs. There used to be thousands, lots of products. Now there's really, 4 major SKUs. And even this has changed since Broadcom took over VMware. So you've got your 2 base level SKUs, kind of the standard as well as the Enterprise Plus SKUs. These ones are defined to really let you go in and get just basic virtualization. Now, Broadcom is going to come in and say that we really do not want you buying those. we're going to make them expensive. We may not even give you a quote for it if you're a large enough organization. Really, where they want you focusing is on that vSphere Foundation, VVF, and really they want you on VCF, which is their entire suite. Broadcom has been putting a ton of development dollars and time into really refining the VMware Cloud Foundation suite. So you'll see this summer, the new VCF 9 suite will be launching, and they're trying to make it operationally simple for you to build your own private cloud with it. Instead of having all these disparate products, they'll be working a lot closer together. Now, you also have some add-ons that you can add on to VCF, sometimes for VDF. Standard enterprise, you really can't add much onto. These extend some of the features, and we'll go into some of those here in a little bit. But just knowing that really it's those 4 main licenses are your core products. They have a new requirement, which means previously we were either a per socket license or basically per CPU license up to 32 cores. Now they're licensing every single core on that server. And you have a minimum of 16 cores per CPU socket. So if you have a remote site that maybe you had, I only needed like 12 CPUs or 12 cores on that CPU, you're still going to pay for 16. This can impact environments like database environments or other places where you've really optimized your licensing for the applications and the OSs, just because you're still going to pay that 16 core minimum. Also, if you add a server in a year or so from now, and you're like, I need to add a license onto it, you now have a minimum of 72 cores per transaction, which means if I buy a server with 32 cores and I need to add more VMware licensing, I've got to buy 72 cores. And then I'm going to have those 40 extra cores sitting around that I could add to another server, but it kind of adds a little bit of overhead to it. And again, Broadcom, that's a recent change, is doing that mostly to cover their costs of transacting on a lot of these little onesie twosie deals that they were seeing out there. So it makes it pretty important to start looking at how do we really understand the path forward and make sure that we're aligned well. Now, the other products within the VMware portfolio, for example, VMware's Horizon and Workspace ONE, have now been divested out, and they're part of a company called Omnissa. Now, Omnissa has held pretty much the exact same licensing model they had beforehand. Back in 2021, 2022, they were already moving to kind of discontinue their perpetual licenses and move to a subscription or term license. A lot of their Horizon licenses included basically a subscription to a VMware hypervisor underneath the surface that was licensed per user. Part of their exit from Broadcom, they got to keep that kind of license term, which means for VDI environments, make sure you're looking at your VMware purchases for those underlying VDI instances from Omnissa. If you go through VMware directly, it tends to be a higher cost and it's per core. Whereas when we really look at Omnissa's offering, these VMware VVF licenses are still licensed per user, which means I can still have a high core density, a lot of memory, GPUs, everything else on that box to really provide the best possible user VDI experience or application delivery experience without being constrained by, I've only got 16 cores that we licensed on this box and I'm way over provisioned on it. So this can really help to maintain your costs. If you're using Workspace ONE out there, those SKUs transition directly over to Omnissa. They're still the same subscription-based for either per user, per device, and whatever product line you have underneath there. So when you're going through renewals, just understand that all the Horizon, Workspace ONE, they're going to go through Omnissa separately, but then the rest of your VMware portfolio is going to go directly through Broadcom as we go forward. All right, so when we start looking at this and looking in the environment, there's kind of 3 different paths we see for organizations. You're either, this is your first time going through that Broadcom subscription conversion and renewal. It means you haven't really gone through the pain of seeing what the license is going to cost, how your licenses are going to translate. Or maybe you did a 1-year renewal up front, like, hey, I want to make sure I can feel out the market. Maybe there's an alternative. Maybe I'm going to stay on it. Maybe I'm going to go off of it. And now you're coming up on the end of that 1-year renewal. Or maybe you did a 3-year renewal and you've been through the process and you're still on the fence of does it make sense to stick around with it. So when we look at first time renewal, we have kind of a 3-step process we look at. It's understanding what is the current state of your environment and what is our possible path for VM renewal. How do we optimize and right size? And then how can we identify any value in those bundled products they might try to include to see if that can help alleviate costs elsewhere in the environment by decommissioning other products. And then last of all, making sure, well, if that doesn't make sense and we get a quote and it's just astronomical, that maybe we have time to find an alternative. That 1-year one, if you still got a little bit of time on it and you're still on the fence if you want to stick with VMware, it's the same thing. You keep trying to optimize and right size. We're going to keep trying to identify value, but you definitely need to be evaluating those alternatives as soon as possible. Don't be waiting on that. And finally, if you've got a little bit of time, again, continue to try to get that environment right-sized, optimized, continue to cycle the life cycle of your systems, find the value, and again, evaluate if it makes sense. And we'll dive into each of these little areas in a lot more depth here as we go forward. So when we look at kind of those 3 paths, so the as-is environment, this is typically where you're going to engage a partner like A&M. We can go in there and help you understand what's in the environment. Same thing with optimizing and right-sizing. We can go in and kind of figure out what's best in the environment, what's out there, how do we go through it. And then the identifying value, we can help you kind of map those. VMware loves to jump into the identifying value with their bundled products. It kind of makes them feel good that they're delivering a nice return on investment, which you have to take with a big grain of salt there. But we can help kind of align to where you're trying to go as an organization and kind of some of your business goals and outcomes you're trying to achieve and see if there is value. There isn't always. So the as-is path forward, how do we start this here? Because we really want to figure out what are the license options and what do they cost for just what you have today. Doesn't matter if you're in that 1-year renewal or if you're previously just starting on your first renewal. You kind of have to know, what do we need to license? And also, as part of that, we'd like to know kind of what does that roadmap look like? I mean, over the next years, 3 years, 5 years, are you possibly going to have a cloud migration? Do you have a big, application that maybe is getting retired or replaced that's going to free up capacity? Then understanding kind of what those hosts look like, what licenses you're using, that per host core counts. If you use technologies like vSAN, we need to know the raw storage for each cluster and any other VMware licenses. We can collect this through a bunch of different methods. Usually we grab an RV tools of the clusters, or we have VCF operations, previous ARIA or vRealize operations deployed to help us get that information. VMware has some vSAN sizing scripts that are used for licensing that we might run against an environment. But also we like to look at the server lifecycle and other licenses that might be running on those servers. Think Microsoft Data Center for the servers. That's a per core license. So if I maybe understand where my VMware licenses are and I start to optimize, this might be something that we're going to examine during that. And what this gives us out of all these tools is that you start to get an idea of, okay, what is the worst case that I might have? And that's that MSRP cost analysis. Now, Broadcom doesn't do list pricing. They do MSRP, which means your price could be higher than MSRP if you try to go standard or enterprise plus. Typically, it's going to be lower if you're VCF or VVF. Also, understanding those other license costs so we can get kind of a total cost per host. This helps you understand what is the cost if we started to life cycle out hardware, or do we have compatibility issues within hardware? All these are kind of important to understanding what you have in the environment. Now, when I mention other VMware licenses or NSXT licenses, there's really 2 areas that impact us when we're doing renewals. The first really is vSAN, or if you're running a Dell VxRail environment. So vSAN is only supported in VVF or VCF licenses. Standard Enterprise Plus can't run vSAN anymore. And we have to license all that vSAN capacity that's on those clusters. Typically, the way they price things, VCF tends to be the cheapest option. VVF works for very, very lightweight or very small vCEN environments sometimes because they're licensed at basically a quarter of a TB raw storage per core that's licensed inside that environment. Whereas VCF goes to a full TB. One thing we've also been learning recently is if you have VxRail in your environment, to be able to get a hardware renewal on VxRail for Dell, you have to have VMware VCF licensing. You don't get a choice on anything else. And it has to be there for you even to get a renewal quote. So even if your VMware expires like 6 months after your VxRail support is, you're going to be renewing at that point of VxRail support if you want to have that hardware support on the Dell systems. So that one's been a big caveat we've been running across quite a bit. This is also an area where if you run VDI on a Dell VxRail, and of course you might be like, hey, I got the VVF licenses with Horizon. Well, now you've got to purchase an upgrade license to go to full VCF from VMware just to run on the VxRails. So we found that the Dell VxRail appliance, it was built with VMware back when Dell owned VMware. It's very tightly integrated, and VMware has really been Broadcom's been really kind of crushing back down on Dell and forcing them into this exact method here. And it's not necessarily Dell wanting to do that, but it is VMware pushing down on them. The other big piece that kind of drives VCF is NSX. So it doesn't matter if you were using the distributed firewall or if you're actually doing full NSX software-defined networking. The only suite that has it now going forward is VCF. You can't get NSX, you can't get distributed firewall and any of the other license packages. Again, they've only included this with their software-defined networking stack. So if you needed just the distributed firewall, it means you're buying VCF and then you're buying an add-on for vDefend, which is the rebranding of the distributed firewall for NSX, or ATP on top of vDefend. So this is a good one to keep in mind. This typically is one of those areas that drives that cost increase because customers might have been using Enterprise Plus and just the distributed firewall, and now they've got to go to a full suite with the distributed firewall added on top to do that. There's paths here, again, with optimization that maybe we look to alternatives if you're just using distributed firewall and try to cut those costs and keep you underneath a VVF licensing or something like that. All right, so we've got an idea what's in the environment. We've generated out some pieces there. Now it comes down to, are we over-provisioned? So VMware, over the last few years, it's kind of really grown into a free-for-all. We're used to being able to have the resources there where I can go provision whatever I want in the environment. Developers come up with crazy specs for their VMs. So you put this massive number of cores and memory on a VM, shove it in the environment, and it's using 2% of that. So going through and really reviewing the environment and understanding where can we right size, where can we reduce the size, where can we free up resources? Do we have a bunch of systems sitting out there that are no longer used, but we never turned off? All of this can help us to reduce the footprint that we need to license. The same thing exists for compute. If you're coming up on a server refresh and it's similar time frame to when your Broadcom refresh is, current processors, we can align correctly to VMware licensing so that they're as efficient as possible, but even just the performance increases on a 3 or a 5-year-old server are pretty dramatic and can help us, again, shrink clusters where it's possible. Or you start moving from dual CPUs where I only need 24 cores, and we go to a single CPU 24-core system. So finding ways to optimize that hardware, finding ways to reduce our footprint is all key. And I mentioned you need to know your roadmap. Well, if we have legacy systems, maybe we're looking to try to move an ERP system off into a SaaS provider. Maybe we're decommissioning these old ancient systems. If you can get that done and figure out how to prioritize it before your renewal, and again, reduce that footprint, that can have drastic cost savings in the environment. That can be really beneficial to you as you go into a renewal process. Because there's not easy to go in after the fact and say, hey, I need less cores. VMware is going to be like, well, I'll see you in 3 years at the end of your contract. Now you can reduce your cores, maybe. So making sure we understand upfront is so important to these, because this contract is not very flexible once you get into it. Now, the same applies if we're doing all this work for optimizing, understanding our licenses. It's a good time to look at your other licenses, Microsoft, Oracle, any other application ones that are server or core based. Because if we're right sizing an environment, it's not a lot of extra work to go in and say, wait, we can go and optimize my operating systems, my Windows costs, and maybe help to cut those costs to help offset this huge increase in VMware costs. Or that maybe, hey, I've examined my databases and we only had them virtualized because it made hardware replacements a little easier. Well, maybe it's more cost effective for us to move back to physical. I've had a couple customers here in region where they're like, hey, half my environment was an OpenShift cluster running on VMware and some Oracle databases. I moved those all to physical and suddenly my VMware renewal bill was a quarter of what it was before. That's huge. That's a huge cost avoidance that we can try to get in by looking at that. Now, some of these when we look at this, look like these type of sheets. We might have, hey, here's our MSRP costs that we look at and we can calculate out and say, okay, so if I've got, certain number of vSAN TB and I've got cores, I know I can go to VCF or VVF. What's that look like over 1 year, 3 year, 5 year at MSRP value? Again, knowing that VMware has all the knobs that they can turn to either make it as painful as MSRP, or they can make it a lot less in cost. For large scale environments, we go a lot deeper into comparing and looking at every cluster, every single host, compatibility, looking forward, and really can help you analyze an entire environment and understand the footprint you have for VMware and understand the footprint you have for those servers and the features you're using and whether or not you can change. So there is another licensed version of VCF called VCF Edge, where if you have 10 remote sites that maybe you only have 2 or 3 servers in, that Edge license can save you a substantial amount of cost over the full VCF license, but it has the exact same feature set. And it can still be managed centrally, and we can still turn on certain advantageous features for remote sites like vSAN and things like that. Same thing if you're looking at like Microsoft licensing. So these two ones here at the bottom are ones that I was doing for a customer recently, where they kind of built out a huge environment. They've been slowly consolidating and going through stuff, and they had a Microsoft renewal very similar time to their VMware renewal. And just by going through this optimization exercise and looking at it, it was a drastic reduction in number of cores needed. We didn't need 2,000 cores of Microsoft. Suddenly we needed, 700 cores in that range. And then same thing on the VMware side, just by changing where and how we were licensing stuff and decommissioning clusters that had almost no utilization. Again, we're able to save in the range of almost 1,000 cores off their renewal. That type of cost avoidance is huge and hugely beneficial and tends to easily justify spending the legwork and the time it takes to really look at your environment seriously. All right, so we've gotten through there. We've optimized. We're starting to get to that point. Now, at this point here, it's not a bad time to actually start talking with VMware. I don't usually like to engage VMware right when you're still trying to figure out what we have in the environment or where it's going to be, mostly because you don't want to tip your hand and say, oh, yeah, I've got to do 2,000 cores. Oh, wait, it's going to be 1,500 cores, because VMware is going to get it in their mind that you have 2,000 cores, and they're going to keep the cost the same, whether it's 1,500 or 2,000. So once we get to kind of how do we maximize value, that's where you start to look at, okay, I know I have to align to VVF or VCF. What can I do out of it? For whatever reason, my slides are not building correctly here, but it's the wonders of presentations on these things. But we can look at, for example, VCF operations. It's really designed and bundled with a lot of the pieces, but it's designed to help you optimize a VMware environment, to become more proactive in your monitoring, to help you with security compliance and troubleshooting and capacity management over time. And if we get into VCF, we can get even deeper where we get into like automated lifecycle management, governance, enabling your DevOps teams, monitoring, your entire stack, where maybe we could avoid other monitoring systems costs. Maybe we could try to move that cost over if we're stuck with VCF. Because the worst thing you can do is like, okay, we're forced into VCF, but we're only going to use vSphere and vCenter going forward because I don't care about the rest of the stuff. It makes sense to take the time for the teams to dig deep, look at those, and see really where is their value. Can I make value? Can I continue to drive costs down? Can I do tool justification? Those are all key for that. And if we look at other products like vSAN, it's bundled with both VVF and VCF. Maybe we can take some load off if we have a shared SAN in the environment when we do a server refresh and utilize that license, kind of do some other cost avoidance in other areas. With NSX, while a lot of people really don't need the NSX software-defined networking, it tends to add complexity in a lot of places. Things like the network ops, so what's now VCF operations for networks, this gives you the ability to do full application dependency mapping, understand your entire attack surface, help you plan for microsegmentation, let you monitor and do, basic network assurance and verification across the environment, across a whole bunch of different vendors. That can be very valuable to drive, again, value. Most of our app teams have no idea how stuff communicates. So for a security team or for your disaster recovery scenarios, to be able to say, hey, I know how stuff is talking. I know how I can fail stuff over. That can be a great benefit to you. Again, don't stick with just trying to implement Enterprise Plus and Standard if you get pushed into this. Look for the value, try to use the value. It's somewhat painful sometimes for teams to change tooling or ideals, but it makes sense to look at it because it can help to reduce the pain of these renewal costs. All right, so we covered kind of the as is, the optimize, identify, bundle. So at some point, usually towards this point here, the identify value is where we're engaging Broadcom. How do we make that a less painful experience? So we've learned through a lot of pain, unfortunately, so what this looks like. So we do like to start early in the renewal process, making sure that we're keeping our cards a little bit close to our chest as to what we're having to renew, but starting to try to build some level of relationship with the Broadcom rep that you're stuck working with. Having a partner that can, be a buddy to them on the back end and try to help push and try to make that guy feel good, because those Broadcom reps, if they're traditional VMware ones, man, they are just getting beat up in the market. They hear every customer yelling at them about cost increases. Now, the Broadcom native ones, they've been used to that for years and they seem to be immune to it. But figuring out what type of vendor they are and whether or not, hey, do we need to take more of a pushback or more of a friend and try to get benefits type of approach to them. You need to understand that you're going to be probably looking at a 3 or 5 year term agreement. They have this listed as recommended on their sites for what they recommend you to license, but the reality is Broadcom gets to choose what they want to give you. They may not even allow us to quote a 1 year. Or we might come up with this beautiful idea of, hey, we're going to have these licenses for these hosts, these licenses for these hosts, and they come back and say, no, you're going to do VCF on everything because that's what we want you to do. So understanding that what you get locked into is a long-term agreement. They do have annual payments available, so we can go in and say, okay, even if it's a 3-year agreement, we can still pay annually. That was them trying to take off the sting of that 1 year time period that they were trying to get rid of, which was already more expensive. It was usually a 20% or so uplift over a 3-year contract. Know that once you're in a contract, you cannot downsize your license count. You can't change to a lower license level. And you'll find a lot of times during a renewal process, they want that contract to grow, not shrink. So they may not give you preferential pricing, or your pricing may be more expensive if you try to downsize than if you were to add a few cores of an extra product or something on top, like, hey, okay, we'll try that distributed firewall stuff. Your price might then drop below what it is if you'd cut and optimized. So understanding that there's some challenges with renewals is key when you go into this negotiation. We're starting to see with larger scale contracts that Broadcom's been offering a cancellation clause, basically saying that, hey, you commit to this 3 years, great, you'll pay every year, but we have a clause in there where you can cancel at any time if you need to. Those are great because it does mean that if you are looking to get off of Broadcom, or maybe not because the alternatives aren't great, that you have time. You can get into that contract, pay annually still, and then if you do find that there's something that works and you're ready to pull the trigger, you can then cancel that contract. We typically see that customers have to ask for it. It's usually, we're talking 10,000 cores or more before it's like offered up front, and they may not for very small deals. So it never hurts to ask when we're talking with Broadcom, but it's not always a guarantee they'll include it. But definitely for larger deals, they typically do. Also, if you're first time going into it, when you move up to VCF license renewals, they tend to include services or jumpstart workshops that can help you drive adoption inside the environment. If you're like, oh my goodness, we're still on vSphere 7, we're doing a renewal, we know we want to get to 8 and maybe get to VCF 9 in the future, and I don't have the team to do all those upgrades, they can bundle services in that you can engage with right away to go do those for you and help you out with that. Granted, I'm sure on the back end they're bundling that pricing right in, but at least it's something that gives it back to help your teams out. And you can usually push for how much or how little you want of this. But really remember that the Broadcom sales rep, they get to choose what they want to do. Broadcom gives them a number of what they expect from your organization, and they're going to find a way to meet it typically. And they don't make a lot of money, or if any money, on many of the SKUs. So like standard or enterprise, the reps don't get paid on those. That's why they become so hard to sell. The reps don't want to have to go in there and say, yeah, I'm going to make no money on renewing this stuff. Yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll make them the same price as VVF, and you can buy VVF and I'll make my money on it. So these ones are always a little bit tricky, but keep in mind that that's really where VMware is going to try to position you. Again, we've had a lot of experience working with a lot of the different Broadcom reps all throughout the country on both very large accounts where we're talking 10,000, 15,000 cores, down to the smallest ones where we're in the few hundred core range. So we've seen a big variety of how these tend to go, and we're always happy to walk you through exactly how to do it, work with the rep, and really work with your teams to optimize and get the right licenses as you go forward. All right, so we've gone through all this renewal journey, and we kind of reached to the point where, okay, we've either renewed or we've got some time, and we want to actually look at what is out there. What makes sense to do? I mean, do we stick on VMware, or do we really take the idea of, well, change is opportunity sometimes? Maybe if I do change, I can find a way to drastically cut costs, or I can gain new efficiencies, or I can take the advantage to modernize some applications. So what does that look like? So if you're trying to evaluate and you're sitting in here, you've got this big renewal cost, and you're like, how or does it make sense to change? I mean, if we stay on VMware, it's of course that known platform. It's truly the best hypervisor platform in the industry. It's got the broadest ecosystem. It's got great industry skill sets from staff. It's not hard to find a VMware expert. They're building on their private cloud capabilities. I mean, the idea with VCF 9 is that it's the private cloud in a box that I just deploy up, and it's easy to manage, and I can start to build automation, and it acts like the public clouds do, only locally. But we have some of those challenges, especially around things like, uncertainty of what is Broadcom going to do next that's going to throw us off. Or maybe I've got a ton of really small sites, but I don't have enough to meet the VCF edge site costs, so that's increasing my costs. Or maybe I've got, I don't really want to move past just the hypervisor. I just don't need anything else. I don't care about anything else. Things like this might suddenly drive you to say, all right, it's getting expensive enough. Let's look at alternatives. And that could really drive a lot of license cost savings. It helps a lot with certain small environments or lots of little remote branch offices. And it's a great excuse to modernize those applications. Now, with anything, it's similar to a cloud migration. There's risk. We have to go through an entire workflow to figure these out. And if we do select a hypervisor, it's not a quick pull the trigger, cut over, and call it good. It's typically A lot of planning that goes into it. We got to figure out what we can use, what we can't use. And really, it comes down to a few things. Do we have enough time? This is why if you get into one of those contracts and you can drive Broadcom to give you that cancellation clause as part of it, that buys you time. If you're in that 3-year renewal and you have the time, then it's a great time to start at least keeping your eye on alternatives. I have very few customers that don't have lab environments running right now where they're playing with Hyper-V or playing with Nutanix or OpenShift virtualization or one of the major products out there, trying to see, hey, does it work? You have to look at what you have for licensing today. So something like Microsoft, if I'm already licensed for Microsoft, then it's a lot easier to start to justify licensing costs for Hyper-V because I already own it. It's just a major migration cost, and typically I can reuse hardware space for that. Whereas if I go to a Nutanix, maybe I can't. Understanding your application and workload compatibility is big. Is the systems you're running on there, if they're a third-party application, are they actually compatible and certified to run on that new hardware? Things like Cisco Call Manager and stuff like that is, well, very much VMware centric. They haven't opened up a lot of certifications for other platforms yet. So you might still be stuck with that in places. You have to understand what it's going to take as you go through these to upskill your staff. How easy is it to find somebody in the future that knows this stuff if you had staff turnover? Does it work with how you're operating today for, operations teams, monitoring systems, all that stuff that goes as part of it? Do your developers, can they tie into it natively and easily? Can we support the life cycle of those systems? Heck, does it have actual decent support? We've seen a lot of noise in the market with products like Proxmox, which is, it's actually a nice little hypervisor platform, easy to manage. Problem is they're based out of Australia and their support is business hours Australia time, which for most critical businesses, that's just not acceptable. I can't have an outage midday and then have to wait all the way till my engineers work overnight to work with support and hope they resolve it during the business hours in Australia. That just doesn't fly. So we have to understand, is it a supportable system? Do they have enterprise level support? Do they have experience working with the enterprise? And of course, everything that touches VMware today, again, they have a huge ecosystem. Your storage systems integrate with them, your backup systems integrate with them, monitoring's tied into them. You have maybe DR sites that are using certain tools for portability. You've got ease of being able to move those VMs just about anywhere because there's tooling, there's products, there's an entire ecosystem. So switching hypervisors, you have to really look at everything that touches that environment and making sure that it's compatible. And it can be worth it. If it is, it's absolutely worth it. We're getting more and more service engagements to help customers finish those migrations after those evaluations. So it's not that it fits everyone. Again, VMware is still a tough product to beat as far as capabilities. And a lot of the other industry have kind of brought their prices up too. So they're just below VMware. But it's a good opportunity to at least look, see what's out there, see if there's something that better aligns to your goals as an organization. And when you look at some of the alternatives, it's a growing market. So the ones on this slide are the ones that we've found that have the best enterprise support, that have excellent roadmaps, that have either a longer history of actually running or something that is rapidly evolving from a long-standing product. So Microsoft, we know Hyper-V's existed for going on 17 years now, 18 years. I tried it when in 2008, wasn't great. 2016, it was getting better. 2019, it got even better. Today with 2025, it's actually getting to the point where it is a very good hypervisor product. Migrations are a little tricky. Management's a little bit different than VMware, but you can even attach it up and manage it through Azure if you wanted. Or you could use Azure Local, which is based off of Hyper-V, is their hyperconverged product. Again, managed through Azure. These are a great opportunity because you tend to own licensing for them if you own Microsoft. Now, if you're truly diehard, like, I can't do Microsoft. They've burned me too many times. There's other options showing up. They're typically KVM based. So Nutanix, HPE VM Essentials, which is a new one that's rapidly kind of maturing and growing into the market. These are both KVM based. AHV's been around a long time. It's starting to pick up momentum. Unfortunately, so with Nutanix, it's also a subscription based per core. They tend to be priced just below that VMware mark for most scenarios, but the remote office, branch office can be pretty good. We'll dive into all of these in depth with Matt Good on our next webinar, which I'll show you guys the date for here in a little bit. VM Essentials is one that's been kind of around as a product called Morpheus that HPE acquired and now have kind of productized a little bit better. This one's a great product. Today it's HPE only, but looking at towards the end of the year, it'll be expanding out to everybody. It's a fraction of the cost of really VMware or some of the others. And if today you run Red Hat and maybe you're a big OpenShift environment where you've used containers and you have some skill sets, then Red Hat virtualization, which is based off of OpenShift, can be a great option as well. And of course, there's always cloud migrations. Even with VMware's cost increases, it's still typically weighted more towards on-prem for certain workloads that are going to be cheaper, but there's always opportunities to use cloud to at least reduce your footprint or reduce cost with VMware as you go forward. And we can, again, dive deeper into those here in a month. So with that, we do have that follow-up webinar I mentioned. This one's kind of doing a deep dive into those alternatives, what those migration paths look like, the pros and cons of each, what we're kind of seeing, what migrations look like. Looks like it's going to be May 22nd here, I think 2 p.m. Central. I hope I put that time right there, Colleen. And that one should be
yes, that's correct.
Awesome. So that one should be a good one. There'll be a link similar to where this one was sent. I recommend you get your technical teams to it. Even if you're like, we're probably going to stick with VMware, it never hurts to understand what's out there as well in the industry. Definitely going to be more technically focused than this one, where I was trying to balance between all levels of people that we had out there. So with that, I think that's all we had for today. We've got some time for some Q&A. If anybody's got questions or wants to dive into anything, we can certainly dive into those. Let's see here. All right, looks like we've got one that I missed entirely. So we've got a question here, it looks like, for, is there a trigger that'll allow you to continue on VVF instead of converting to VCF? If you can talk VMware into it. It seems to be the big one. If you're not using vSAN, you don't need NSXT, and you're like, I just need a virtualization platform, and you either expand a little bit or you add something on top, usually as a cost increase at your renewal, then VMware will typically allow VVF. But again, there's going to be caveats. If you're using vSAN, they're probably going to push you to VCF. If you're using even some of the features, or they feel like you should be spending more with them, they may, again, encourage you to go to VCF with very good pricing on VCF and very poor pricing on VVF. But it seems to be up to the reps individually as to whether or not they allow you to stay on VVF versus going to VCF. The renewals after like a year or after the 3-year mark, it seems like they're really, really pushing hard to do that. Perfect. All right, any other questions, or Colleen, I'll hand it over to you here.
Thank you so much, David. That was terrific. Does anyone have any additional questions? If you do, please go up to the top bar and you'll see a Q&A icon. Just hit that and you can put your question in for us.
Yep, and if you think of something later on, of course, there's Colleen's contact info down there. Feel free to reach out to her. We're always happy to get some of our engineers on the call and talk through this in more depth with how it's aligned to your environment, your use cases, and your unique situation, because everybody's a little bit different in how Broadcom deals with them, as well as really what your outcomes you're trying to achieve with the renewal are.
Hey, David, there was one in the chat that I don't know if you want to, I took it a little bit, but I don't know if you want to expand on it since we've got.
Yep. Yeah, so absolutely. So actually, Broadcom's been shifting a little bit. They learned recently that their whole strategy of taking like the top 2,000 customers direct wasn't quite working. So what Broadcom is doing is they're really pushing hard on their customers to become experts on it, which means we have to put a lot of skin in the game. I mean, for us, it's, I think, 12 or 16 different certified individuals on staff that we have to have. We have to have deep technical certifications, be able to show services capability. And then VMware starts to become very channel friendly. They're willing to work with us. They're willing to get the skin in the game. And they've narrowed it down now. Instead of 2,000 direct, it's more like 500 direct. And everybody else is now they're pushing through partners to try to give that higher touch. Just because partners like us, we tend to be very good at understanding not just the VMware piece, but everything else in your ecosystem, and help you kind of realize that value of their product, but also continue to optimize everything else around in your environment, like Microsoft licensing, Oracle licensing, stuff like that. Hopefully that answers everything there.
Terrific.
Perfect.
All right. It seems that, oh, he gave you a thumbs up, David, so he appreciates that
Awesome.
answer. All right, everyone. Well, if there are no other questions, we'll wrap it up for today. I encourage you to please reach out to us if you need any more assistance with your VMware questions, if you want us to perform an analysis, and we will be sending out the new webinar for May 22nd at 2 p.m. Central Time, where we will do a deeper dive into those alternatives for VMware. So thank you very much for attending again today, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.